Everybody, please open your your cameras. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 24, 25, 26, 27. 3 more. O sige, good enough, Paul? 3 more lang ang kulang eh.
Okay na yan.
Okay. I'm gonna make my snip now. Smile! Okay. Thank you, everybody. Okay.
Okay, let me know when to begin.
Please do.
Sorry? What?
Go
Let
ahead,
me know.
DREXX.
Okay, thank you. Magandang umaga sa lahat. Today we're going to be talking about the practical applications of cybersecurity as it relates to SYSSEC 3. And basically, cybersecurity, I have to put this in because a lot of people kind of confuse what cybersecurity is. And it's talked a lot in our laws. So, doon pa lang sa Cybercrime Prevention Act of 2012. Pero for everybody here, since we are all constituents of the Philippines, everybody must take into consideration the actual definition of cybersecurity per our law. The definition of cybersecurity in the law trumps or takes precedence over the definition of cybersecurity in any ISO standards, in any PCI DSS, or any other self-proclamation out there. So cybersecurity is defined as the protection of computer systems and networks from information disclosure, theft or damage to their hardware, software or electronic data, as well as from the disruption or misdirection of IT services. Cybersecurity also includes definitions for measures taken to maintain the privacy of individual personal information while supporting the free flow of information for national development and rapid, inclusive, and sustained economic growth. That second part is from the Data Privacy Act of 2012. Now, we need cybersecurity because, again, it is required by the Data Privacy Act of 2012. As I've been told, Professor MAGSAYSAY has reiterated a lot of times that people who violate the Cybercrime Prevention Act risk going to jail as well as being fined for a lot of money. If you are negligent in your application of cybersecurity for your company or organization, whether it be a government or non-profit organization, you are liable for Data Privacy Act. The only organization that is exempt from violations is the core, the nucleus, which is the family. Hindi mo pwedeng i-demanda nanay mo for data privacy violations, for example. Another one are the rules of electronic evidence that have been amended in 2019 for electronic artifacts, which demands that any offered electronic evidence must be proven authentic by demonstrating its reliability, integrity. As I mentioned, Cybercrime Prevention Act of 2012, possession of or use of hardware or other tools used to commit cybercrime, which we call hacking tools, is also a criminal offense in the Philippines. Mere possession lang, pwede ka ng kasuhan. However, kung auditor ka or mandated ito ng trabaho mo to be a cybersecurity officer, then you're exempt from possession, from being, charged with violation of the Cybercrime Prevention Act. Kasi this clause in the law makes it a potential minefield of legal hazards. Kasi one person's administration tool is another person's hacking tool. So you should be cognizant of that. That's why I said earlier today that you may want to keep this PDF that I sent to you via the chat, because you will be using this this information for the next 5 or 7 years of your career, and you will be referring to it often. And also, the same information is available to you from DTI, but you have to pay like 200 pesos and it's going to be in paper form. If you want to buy it directly from ISO, it's going to be at least 300 euros per paper. But I digress. We'll get to that later. So, additionally, you need cybersecurity because every organization is legally obliged to have a secure environment. And if you go into different sectors of the industry, you will have more stringent requirements for cybersecurity. Pero no matter where you are, the minimum are these three. The requirement for cybersecurity, because you need to be careful not to be in violation of the Intellectual Property Code of the Philippines. Bawal ang pirated audio and video sa organization ninyo. Bawal maglagay sa computer, bawal maglagay sa server, and bawal ipadala via email. Another thing that na bawal din are child abuse images and violations of women, or any forms of dehumanizing acts, bawal to be transmitted in the organization's IT assets. It doesn't matter kung napadaan lang sa'yo, pero once pinadalhan ka, bawal yun. Kailangan mo, you cannot save it, you should all immediately report to it. But we'll talk about that later. Another thing, bakit importante ang cybersecurity is the requirements of the Philippine Standard on Auditing. Hit me up later, pero because of violations like a decade ago on cybersecurity controls, there were internal system administrators in pesos security. Another thing, if you find yourself in the financial industry, whether you be working for a pawn shop company or an insurance company, not insurance, a bank or a treasury kind of company, you are going to be legally obliged to have a cybersecurity environment. It is because the Bangko Sentral, or the Central Bank of the Philippines, mandates that banks, financial companies, and even non-bank financial institutions like in GCash at saka yung Paymaya, who perform quasi-banking functions, should implement strict cybersecurity controls field, and it is propagated using DSP circulars or the manual of regulations per industry. Additionally, SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, they have rules that prescribe a minimum set of cybersecurity controls for corporations to comply with. Lastly, the reason why you need to have good cybersecurity practice is because of your moral and social obligation to maintain a proper cyber hygiene for your organization. Now, when you employ all of these controls, when do you tell your boss or your business owner, is your enterprise secure? It's not an easy question to answer because different organizations have different assets. You have different cultures, even subcultures. You face different risks. And of course, hindi lahat ng organization mayaman. So you have different level of resources that these organizations can access or afford. For example, iba yung culture ng school, ng university versus the bank versus a government. A government, depending on the type of government agency, other government agencies like tourism have less stringent security requirements than the military. That's one thing. So basically what I'm trying to say is that you are only secure when you can reasonably trust your information system. Reasonably is the key word here. Kasi reasonably, that has a meaning, a legal meaning na pag sinabi mo reasonable, maintindihan ka agad ng mga lawyers or ng mga policymakers what it means. Now, generally, when you say you are cybersecurity, you must have undergone a set of procedures to demonstrate assurance. For example, you have information assets, which is you find down right of this presentation. That's what you're trying to protect. To get to be able to tell your boss or your CTO or your stakeholders that your guys are secure, you first need to adopt audit techniques. Then you have capable auditors, IT security auditors. The IT security auditors, I'm going to go from the top down. So the IT security auditors will perform work, will perform the audit techniques, and if they're happy with it, they're going to produce an audit report, which will then give the assurance to stakeholders and give everybody, the confidence that all the tools, all the security controls, all the training that you went through, those are all countermeasures. They all function reliably, and thus you minimize risks, and thus you can tell your stakeholders and owners that your information assets are secure. You need to go through this process before you can say that your systems are secure and before you can sleep at night. Now, how do you demonstrate cybersecurity? How do you maintain or how do you achieve cybersecurity? Basically, government regulators like the BSP have provided considerable guidance to organizations on how to implement reasonable security. This includes prescriptions. Sasabihin sa'yo diretso, bibigyan ka ng checklist for a proper implementation of risk management systems that include employment of competent, keyword there is competent people, processes, policies, and technical controls. I emphasize competent because competent, again, is very easily understood by lawyers and everybody else in the industry. It's not something you can fudge or double speak on. So, guidance can be used to interpret as something useful to help absolve them from charges of negligence. Yung mga compliance report na sinasabit sa BSP, sa Bangko Sentral, or sa National Privacy Commission, or for industry organizations that require it, for example, PCI or the payment card industries, which requires compliance report or self-assessment reports. Kasi you're handling credit cards or debit cards. And then, of course, if you want to show, better assurance for your stakeholders, the public, especially when you are managing data centers, which are worth hundreds of millions of pesos, if not billions of pesos, then you need to employ ISO IEC certification, because this is the best way for you to show that you meet the required standards. And this is audited by a third party. So walang bolahan. Now, going to SYSSEC, reviewing your course program outline. I've put them all in this diagram to show you their relationships. So yung COBIT at saka yung ISO IEC 31000, those are enterprise-wide. Kaya yung enterprise 31000 is very, very generic. In risk management that it talks about, it's not just for IT, but also for legal risk, for environmental risk, for financial risk, for risks in employment, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very generic. It can be applicable for the HR people, for the computer science people, for the medical industry, and so on and so forth. So, medyo generic yun. What is more applicable for your course is COBIT. COBIT means Control Objectives for Information Technology. Now, COBIT is better kasi it treats information as an asset, like land, labor, capital, meaning tangible and intangible assets have value. Nilalagay din yan sa financial statements. So, importante yung COBIT. Now, shrinking down, being more specific, your SYSSEC 3 also talks about ISO 27005. 27005 is a subset of ISO 31000. Subset lang siya. In 27005, deals specifically with IT risk management, information security risk management only. In information risk management, the procedures, the concepts, the requirements of 27005, those are used to assess what to do if you are going to implement 27001. 27001 is a certifiable standard to demonstrate information security management system. Meaning, pag sinabing certifiable, meaning you could build your management system and then have somebody audit it, and then you get a nice certificate that says ISO compliant. ISO certified pala, sorry. So 27001 is for information security. 22301 is for business management. Business continuity management system. On another hand, another certifiable standard is ISO IEC 20000 for service management. So service management is not related to security, but it is related to ITIL, and it is basically 20,000 deals with how you service your customers. Your customers could be your internal head, your internal personnel, and yung in-audit dito would be the IT people mostly. Balikan natin mamayang konti yung business continuity or 22301. Now, so you have, going back to 27001, which is the certifiable standard for information security. Yung 27001 deals with management. That's a key word there. It deals with the planning, the doing, the checking of the controls, and the acting on the controls that have been flagged. So PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. Now the actual controls, the checklist of controls that we're going to be talking today is 27002, which is the details, the technical details on how to implement an information management security system. Information security management system. Now, ISO 1000 is an international standard. In contrast, the NIST, or the National Information Standards and Technology, that's an American government agency, NIST. They produce standards called Special Publications 800 series. That's why you call it SP 800 or Special Publications 800 series. Specifically, 800-53 deals with security and privacy controls. It is very much like 27002. So halos parehas lang yan. Sinabi ko lang na subset for this illustration, it's because some of the controls, mas maraming controls yung covered ng 27002. Now, within SP 800-53 are specialized documents that focus on contingency planning. This is NIST SP 800-34, which is focused only on contingency planning. Ang equivalent ng 800-34 to your course that's being taught is ISO IEC 24762, which stands for Disaster Recovery Services. Kaya lang, unfortunately, that standard has been long obsolete. It first came out like 18 years ago. So I guess you were little babies back then nung lumabas yung standard niyan. And by today, the year 2025, it is obsolete and it has been replaced by ISO IEC 2731, which is the standard for business continuity. Business continuity is a requirement of ISO 27002. Kaya lang yung ISO 27031 expands the requirement mentioned in 27002. Now, kung mas mayabang pa yung organization niyo or kailangan ng organization niyo, for example, like you're running a data center, it is almost required to go for certification for business continuity. And that's how ISO 22301 becomes. So, isipin mo, yung ISO 27001 and 27002, that's like Borderlands, for lack of a better, Borderlands 3. Right? Borderlands 3. Tapos, itong mga ISO 2731 or ISO 2735, marami yan. This is not the only ones. Mga DLC, like Tiny Tina's, in Wonderland. So isipin mo DLC itong mga ISO 2731. And yung 22301 is another game by itself. So you can think of it that way. So that's how they relate to each other. Now, another DLC is NIST SP 800-40, which is Enterprise Patch Management, which we will be, dadaanan natin mamaya, pero briefly, because I only have 3 hours and I'm trying to summarize your entire trimester in 2 hours because that's all the time I have left. Okay. So, mag-usapan natin yan mamaya and how it relates to 27002. Another one is 27035, which is Incident Management. In your references, you call it 18044. Well, 18044 is also obsolete. Baby pa kayo, nung lumabas itong product, to standard na to, so it's been replaced with 27035. We will talk about that later on. So, klaro, I hope. Just put on the link. I know this kind of sounds confusing because it's a huge brain dump. Just put it on the chat and I will answer your questions live. Now, we're going to be talking about, we're going to go to the meat of the matter, the cybersecurity controls of ISO 27002. Pasensya na, graphics arts is not my strong, suite. I've never been talented in graphics art. So, but I like ASCII art. So, ASCII art yung ginawa ko for this. Gets you naman. So, we will be talking about 4 themes of controls in the ISO 27002. There's organizational theme. There's people theme. There's the physical theme, and then there's technology theme, right? So, ito 4 na yun, and we will be going through them right now. Now, the first one is the organizational theme. Is the policies, the requirement for policies for information security. So information security policies and topic-specific policies should be defined, approved by management, published, communicated to, and acknowledged by relevant personnel and relevant interested parties, and reviewed at planned intervals and if significant changes occurs. Basically, lahat ng organisasyon or corporations that you're going to go into have this. Because this dictates, because policies for information security is the top level law of the land for the corporations, for example. This tells everybody from the boss, the presidente or yung chairman, down to even the janitor na naglilinis ng lamesa at every night, the information security policy will dictate how information should be handled. This will also dictate what are the firewall rules or how you should configure your intrusion detection systems, how you will configure the firewall rules, and so on and so forth. Everything that we will be discussing today will be dictated by the information security policy. Now, in the information security policy, it must be defined what are the security roles and responsibilities of each person. Again, starting from the top, like in chairman, the president, to the vice president, to the manager, even down to the security guard na ina-outsource lang ng corporation, how they should be behaving if they come across certain scenarios, and what are their roles and responsibilities, and their roles and responsibilities affect their performance as an employee. And violations of this information security policy can lead to the dismissal, if not the suing of that person for civil or criminal liability. So yun yung importante, yung information security roles and responsibilities. There's also segregation of duties. There should be rules on conflicting duties and conflicting areas of responsibilities which should be aggregated. For example, the system administrator who manages the help desk, who manages, receiving complaints or receiving suggestions or receiving alerts from you guys, from the students, should not be the auditors. You cannot be auditors and auditee at the same time. So, yun yung tinatawag na segregation of duties. That's just an example. Management responsibilities require that all information securities should be in accordance or compliant to the established information security policy, topic-specific policies, and procedures of an organization. That is why, in the first test case ng Data Privacy Commission, where I testified in that case, sa COMELEC, when COMELEC was hacked, and all the lahat of tens of millions of people, their data was compromised. Ang kinasuhan doon is si Chairman Garcia of COMELEC, because it was ultimately his responsibility to have an information security policy in place. He was negligent of his role, so nakasuhan siya ng data privacy. Sorry, he was recommended for criminal prosecution by the Data Privacy Commission. Now, contact with authorities and contact with special interest groups are different things, but they do try to do the same. Contact with authorities means that somewhere in your notes, you know ano yung Facebook page, how do you contact Meta if there are violations via Facebook or Instagram? How do you contact the Philippine National Police or the Anti-Cybercrime Group? How do you contact NBI or the Cybercrime Division? How do you contact them? Dapat meron kayong checklist, and this checklist, this directory pala, should be maintained often because those things change. In fact, every time magkakaroon ng organization change, magkaroon ng bagong head, unfortunately, their contact details change. So, establish and maintain contacts with those relevant authorities so that when a breach occurs, you can be able to work with them immediately and preserve evidence. Now, there's another one, contact with special interest groups, because there are groups like the ISOG or ISACA, the Information Security, Audit and Control Association, auditors yan. Maintain contact with them because they have a lot of information that they may be willing to work with you on your problems, or not just problems na naman, but also trying to improve the security posture of your organization. Threat intelligence, requirement ito sa 27002. It's basically a control that says information relating to information security threats should be collected and analyzed to produce threat intelligence. Now, the good news is that there are tools like OpenCTI. They run on Docker. They run very well, and they are free. What's not free is your data to feed into this threat intelligence. And free yung platform, free yung there are lots of free tools out there, pero yung let's just say na in the banking industry, the central bank mandates that banks subscribe to threat intelligence feeds and that they pay for it for millions of pesos. In fact, kayo rin, if you are entrepreneurial enough, if you run a data center and you see a lot of 0 days happening or a lot of stuff that the world doesn't know about, you can sell those threat intelligence for millions of pesos as a subscription. And you can have OpenCTI as a free tool to do that service. So pwede nyo pagkakitaan yung threat intelligence. Kasi binibili rin yan. Now, another one is information security and project management. Information security should be integrated. Kasi a lot of times, for example, this happens in telecommunications. Yung mga nag-insert ng backdoor, I'll be blunt, Huawei does this. So, information security should be integrated to project management, wherein if you have a something happening, you're trying to import something or introduce something, the project management officer should be good enough to know kung meron potential backdoors na sisingitan dyan, or you're recruiting people of dubious backgrounds. So, kailangan isama rin yan. And then of course, inventory of information and other assets should be maintained. Alam nyo dapat kung ano software yung umaandar in your organization. Alam nyo dapat kung ano yung hardware that you're using, ano yung router, saan galing yan, sino yung manufacturer, sino yung vendor, sino yung administrator niyan, and so on and so forth. Because you need it for your patch management, which we will get into later. Yung NIST SP 800-40 release 4. It is required because you cannot patch something that you don't know exists. And also, it is a lot harder to secure your organization if you don't know what you have running inside your network. So, importante inventory. Another thing and why it's important is because you need to know who owns what. So, if something bad happens, you know who to blame or you know how to, to prosecute. And ganun din naman, if something good happens, on the other hand, something good happens, you know who to promote or to glorify. Sa United Nations, when we keep track, actually pati rin sa government, when we keep track of documents, of course there are barcodes in there, but the best thing is to use RFID. So you stick those little stickers like you put on your car, and then you track the documents. You don't need to open every drawer. You just have a scanner, point to you, where are the physical drawers of those documents. And just to give you an idea, controls 5.9, 5.12, 5.13, 5.14, 5.15, 5.33, 7.2, 7.7, and 7.10 are all satisfied by the use of RFID for document management. Now, another one is acceptable use of information and other associated assets. So these are the rules for acceptable use and procedures for handling information and other associated assets because they should be identified, documented, and implemented. For example, dapat merong acceptable use policy ang company na hindi mo pwedeng gamitin your email for personal use. You cannot use your company email to sell stuff in Lazada or to sell stuff in Carousel. Bawal dapat yun. Or if you have an internal AI system, you cannot use that internal AI system for personal gain ninyo. So dapat you have to have that. And then of course, because each personnel or each employee are assigned assets, those people should return those assets. Hindi lang yung physical assets like laptops or computers or monitors, but also databases. If you're given a database, for example, you're a marketing person, and then you you developed a database during the course of your employment, if you develop that database, you should not be owning that, because that is your organization's property. Therefore, that database should be returned back to the organization, and you should delete it on your computers lalo pag nag-work from home ka. Another control that is required is classification of information, which information should be classified according to the needs of an organization based on the confidentiality, integrity, availability, and and other party requirements like data privacy requirements. So kailangan may classification kung secret, confidential, and who owns what. For example, secret but only for IT people, restricted for viewing by secret by IT people, or secret only for the HR, the human resource department, or secret only for the top executives. So ganun meron classification. And to enforce that, you need to label the information. So labeling the communication and classification of information and support automation for information processing and management. Labeling is importante yan dahil later on we will be talking about empty desk. Let's say labeling, you trained your janitors or yung mga cleaners, tapos sa gabi may nakita sila by accident nakakalat in a desk somewhere a classified secret document folder, and then may label siya na red, kulay red. Dapat train yung janitor or yung housekeeper to recognize that it's been marked as red, secret, and then alam ng janitor to surrender it to the security guard for safekeeping. So, mga ganun, that's what we mean by labeling of information and training of the appropriate personnel, of every personnel. Now, when we also say personnel, it's not just employees. It's also yung mga taong nag-OJT, as well as yung mga consultant, as well as yung mga contractors lang. Everybody dapat merong training sa information security policy ng organization. Information transfer, like rules, procedures, agreements should be in place for all types of transfer facilities within the organization and between organization and other parties. It just means, for example, you have a non-disclosure agreement. That's one way of enforcing that control. On another topic, access control. Rules to control physical and logical access to information and other associated assets should be established and implemented based on business and information security requirements. Ito na yung, this access control not only is for firewall rules, but also to tell the security guards or to tell the people with the RFID badges kung saan lang sila pwedeng pumasok or hindi. Hindi palibhasa may RFID badge ka, you can enter any room in the organization that you want. No. You should be limited, and this is dictated by the access control rules. Identity management and authentication information are related. So basically, the full cycle of identities should be managed. And then the allocation and management of such authentication information should be controlled by a management process, including the advising of personnel on the appropriate handling of authentication information. I cannot tell you how many times these controls have been crucial in the prosecution of internal miscreants. Yung mga internal hackers, people who disgruntled employees, without identity management, we would not have prosecuted the bad person. And in fact, there was a bank like years and years ago, because they shared the root password of a control, and this computer was responsible for transferring hundreds of millions of US dollars per month. Nag-share sila ng passwords. When that computer box of theirs were hacked, an entire departments, mga 20 sila, 20 of them were suspended without pay as punishment. And syempre dahil 20 lahat sila administrators, it slowed down the bank's operations to a crawl. So in other words, lahat ng taong sharing a username and passwords with madadamay. So dapat there should be proper identity management for user accounts. Access rights, like I mentioned earlier, should be provisioned, reviewed, modified, and removed in accordance. Because again, access rights are reviewed periodically because people get transferred to different provinces, gets promoted or demoted or fired and then rehired. So they should be periodically reviewed, modified, and removed in accordance with the policy and rules for access control. Another one na we practice, at least for the government, is information security in supplier relationships. Basically, this control says that processes and procedures should be defined. Yes? Okay. Where were we? Information security in supplier relationships. This is practice in the government, wherein we declare that process and procedures should be defined and implemented to manage the information security risk associated with suppliers, products, or services. Sa government, we use the OFAC, the Overseas, basically there's a list maintained by the United States on who to ban na supplier. For example, HIK Vision, that's supplier of CCTV, or Huawei, the supplier of computer devices, including cell phones and laptops and servers. Bawal. So government bawal yan because of geopolitical risk. And it's really a big risk. The Communist Party of China are continuously every day hacking all branches of the Philippine government. And sometimes they are tuso, like they are really wolf in sheep's clothing. They pretend, well, they donate computers, pero yung mga computers ay may backdoor. But I digress. So, importante yung information security in supplier relationships. And then, of course, support that addressing information security within supplier agreements should be done. And because relevant information security requirements should be established and agreed with each supplier based on the type of supplier relationship. In fact, a few years ago, I had a case worth $2 million on the line for a bank. A company supplied a treasury system and it had weak controls. Nagkademandahan sila in an arbitration center. The arbitration center was in Singapore, and I testified to that matter, and the bank won. The bank won $2 million because the information security controls that the bank required was not delivered by the supplier. Sabi, pinipilit nila, pwede na yan, pwede na yan. Eh, hindi pwede yun. Kasi yung banko, if they did not do that, they will be audited by the Banco Central, and then that bank will fail their audits, and therefore hindi siya pwede as per insistence of the vendor. So kailangan meron yan. And then of course, managing information security in the supply chain, because procedures and processes should be defined and implemented. So again, another one way of doing risk management on IT controls is like we're trying hard not to buy China products, because if there is a conflict, if they try to invade Taiwan, you will have no more products coming from China, you will have no technical support. And if your business relied on products from China, then you're dead in the water. So that's one of those things that this control 5.21 is trying to manage and try to alert you on. Another thing is 5.22, monitoring, reviewing, and change management of supplier services. It requires you to regularly monitor, review, and manage change in information security policies, because what this is trying to tell you that although you outsource your your business processes, your automation system to another company, your organization is not absolved from the responsibility of maintaining cybersecurity. Your company is required to maintain a minimum level of cybersecurity practice, even if you outsource it to another country or another place or another vendor. That's what it means here. Changing topic, moving to another topic is information security for use of cloud services. Related to rin to supplier, pero this time it's mainly for cloud services, wherein the processes for an acquisition, use, management, and exit from cloud services should be established in accordance with the organization's information secure requirements. And this is important. If you Google for Microsoft Azure being hacked by Chinese government, like last year yata yun, you would know exactly what I mean with why this control is required. So just as an overview, we talk about software as a service, platform as a service, information as a service. So when we say information as a service, what the cloud provider is telling you is that they're selling you the capability to install your own operating system, like Ubuntu or Windows, and so on and so forth. PaaS is middleware, wherein you're required, the cloud service provider will provide you with the operating system, but it's up to you to install your own Python, to install your own libraries, and so on and so forth. So you can install your own, let's say, PostgreSQL. So yun yung middleware. In contrast, where most of you are maybe familiar with, is the SaaS, or the software application software as a service, which is on the application layer. This is where your Office 365 resides, your Gmail, your Facebook, all of that are SaaS. So that's just an illustration of that. Now, let's move on to another topic, another control, which is information security, management, planning, and preparation. Everyone should plan and prepare for managing information securities by defining and establishing and communication information security incident management processes, roles, and responsibilities. This is your incident response requirement. Now, if you want to have an example of let's say, an incident response plan or procedure, or DFIR, I'm going to show you, I'm going to type in chat right now. If you go to Google and then you type in PDF, manual, sites, insert.gov.ph. So, okay. If you go to chat, I put in instructions on what to type in google.com. So you can download a copy of a government incident response manual that you may want to copy. Okay lang yan, i-download yan ha. Ako naman yung gumawa nun eh. That was like 5 years ago during the pandemic. So it's free for you to download. Pwede nyo rin kopyahin dyan yung Ano to? Yung mga forms of what we used to do. Because you will need that documentation to have a proper incident response management system. And after an incident happens, the 27002 requires that every incident should be assessed and decided upon based on the actual information security events. So the cybersecurity standard requires that the organization should assess information security events and then decide if they are to be categorized as information security incidents or not. Okay, hang on. Now, this is, napabuntugin niya ako because this is what you should be experiencing if you were using your Cywaria, if I remember that correctly, Cywaria, in yung cyber range. You should be experiencing, practicing your skills on a cyber range. You should be composed of a red team, which is the penetration tester or the security audit team, versus the blue team, which is the defense. Like yung mga system administrators, yung IT administrators, and so on and so forth. So, and lawyers actually, pwede mong isama yan dyan. And then you switch. So the purple team are the instructors, the professors who watch the performance of the red team and grade your behavior or your performance accordingly. Yung blue team, ganun din. The blue team is graded by the purple team. So that is what you should be, experiencing in your cyber range, this cyber range exercises, because it enables you to be more effective in your incident response management planning and preparation. The more times that you practice what you know, the better your information security incident management planning and preparation would be. Now, if you were properly using your cyber range, then the blue team will be able to satisfy controls 5.24, 25, 26, up to 28, as well as controls 5.35 and 5.36, and then practicing as well controls 8.15 and 8.16, as well as control 6.3. For the red team, or the penetration testers or the security auditors, you should be practicing control 5.7, as well as 5.35, control 8.29, and control of 8.8. This is the practical reason why you need a cyber range. Now, moving on, responding to information security incidents is not required because incidents should be responded to in accordance with documented procedures. Importante yung word na documented, because if you're going to prosecute somebody for hacking, and if it is not documented and authorized by the upper management, then you have no case. You cannot prosecute. You cannot just make up something and then prosecute somebody. The best you can do siguro is dismissal. But then again, if you don't, if you have no documentation, babalikan kayo ng internal hacker na yon, ng internal criminal na yon, that i-demand the organization for illegal dismissal, which is a labor case. Okay. Moving forward, Control 5.27 is requirement for learning from information security incidents. You have to have knowledge that are gained from information security audit incidents. And this information or knowledge should be used to strengthen and improve your existing information security controls. Now, one of the case management tools, and again, this is free, that should be in your test laboratories, is the DFIR-IRIS. This is a case management tool, and it is used for reporting, because ginagamit ito ng mga teams, internal incident response teams, to pull their evidence, their collected evidence together, to pull their, to join together all their knowledge and clues and notes so that a proper forensic report could be done. And the tool is DFIR IRS. And yes, it can also be installed using Docker Compose files on an Ubuntu or Linux operating system. We can, siguro in the future, we can talk how to install all of these so you can run this on your own home or in the future when you're working for a large customer. Now, a lot of people think that the most exciting part of an incident is the collection of evidence, because this control requires that the organization should establish and implement procedures for the identification, collection, acquisition, and preservation of evidence. Note that I mentioned evidence because evidence is not just electronic, it could also be paper-based, paper or hardware. So any evidence related to information security events. Note that for the definition of all ISO documents, when we say information, it is not just electronic information. It is anything. If it is in code, it is shown on a picture as a painting or as a drawing, then it is called information, and it is within the domain of ISO 27001 or 2. If you write anything like passwords or ideas, even on a toilet paper, as long as it is relevant information, then it is also covered by the ISO standard. So that's why that's why information security is different from cyber security. Cybersecurity involves only electronic information in the cyber domain. In information security, it involves everything. So you can say cybersecurity is a subset of information security. Moving forward, information security during disruption, there should be a plan by organizations to maintain information security even during a disruptive time. So kahit na-hack na kayo, hindi dapat open yung buong network. Dapat mo-maintain pa rin access controls, confidence levels, mataas pa rin dapat, and so on and so forth. Now, yung forensics, I was asked to mention this. So, forensics is basically the interpretation of artifacts, electronic artifacts, and it's used to establish facts, to prove or disprove allegations, so that it may be used in a court of law. Pwede naman, it doesn't always have to be a court of law. It can be, the chairman of the board or the disciplinary board or the human resources committee. It could be that, ganun pa rin, a proper forensic procedure should be established in any case. So a forensic procedure has 4 stages. The first is acquisition of evidence. The second is analysis of evidence. The third is reporting on all collated evidence. And then, if necessary, expert witness testimony. And that's going to be you, if you're the ones doing the actual work. So here's an example of what we do in forensics. The one on the right, that's the picture taken from a CCTV. MP4. So medyo mababa, madilim yung kalsada. That's from a CCTV. However, by interpolating multiple frames from a video camera, we were able to produce a photograph by combining the best frames of all. Kasi kung may dumadaan na jeep, the headlight from the jeepney illuminates parts of the road or parts of the target at any given time. So you take all the bright pictures and then you interpolate them all, you produce the forensic image on the left. So that's what we do. So one of the things that we do. So therefore, it's not magic. It's not like yung napapanood nyo sa TV where you can zoom in, zoom in. This is about as good as it can get from a low quality CCTV. If you look at the right image, you see nothing. But on the left, after doing forensic work, you can actually see the vehicle, and then mas malalaman mo na kung anong vehicle yung hinahanap mo because of this work. Another one is that on the right side, you see a license plate of a vehicle, pero it's you know, you take it from the sideways, right? But if the photograph is good enough, you can actually like try to turn it around and then you can read the license plate. So that's one of the things that we do in digital forensics. Moving forward, you have ICT readiness for business continuity. Readiness for information and communications technology should be planned, implemented, maintained, and tested. That's a lot of what a lot of people fail to do. They don't test their planning for business continuity because, you know, all your backup is useless if you cannot restore your backup. Moving forward, there are requirements for legal, statutory, regulatory, and contractual requirements. So as I mentioned earlier, the need for cybersecurity is not just because nagmamagandang loob ka, but there are actual legal, regulatory, statutory, and contractual requirements for implementing cybersecurity. And it should be documented and kept up to date. Another thing is intellectual property rights. The organization should maintain procedures to protect intellectual property rights. It's not just the content of you know, the songs that you produce or the videos that you made, but also the content, the databases that you are managing inside your organization, or the notes that you made during a research project. And then, of course, protection of records. Records should be protected from loss, destruction, falsification, and unauthorized access and unauthorized release. Already, two laws come into mind. One, yung data privacy law. If you delete information, personal information, you are liable for that if you're not authorized to delete or modify personal information. That is a criminal issue. Another one is yung if you have administrators, or let's say, for example, I once had a case for a bank wherein the branch manager had a huge credit card debt. The branch manager of a bank, and nag-Google siya, he found some hacking tools online, eh medyo pagkatanga din dahil hindi naman siya IT person. He ran the SQL injection tool multiple times and it generated a lot of logs. Yes, nagawa yun, pero the thing is he was caught, and it is important that your IT infrastructure should have controls to fall back on. Now, even if your organization failed to prevent SQL injection, at least there should be logs that are separate and maintained and generated so they could be examined later by the forensic investigator. So that's what protection of records is. And if you fail to protect that and it becomes a criminal case, bawal yun in law, because that would be destruction of evidence. Destruction of evidence is a criminal violation by itself. So dapat you should not allow deletion of records without authorization. Oh, binanggit natin, privacy and protection of personal information. So, again, because of the Data Privacy Act, and again, there is a different standard to protect privacy in an organization, and it's also certifiable. If I'm not mistaken, it's ISO IEC 27701. That is for the personal protection of private information and personal information. So ito subset lang. It's just one of those controls. So basically, what this is requiring is that your organization should identify and meet the requirements regarding the preservation of privacy and protection of PII according to applicable laws and regulations. Again, that is the Data Privacy Act of 2012, and as well as contractual requirements. Another one is the requirement for independent review of information security. So the control mandates that approach to managing information security and its implementation, including people, processes, and technologies, should be reviewed independently at planned intervals or when insignificant changes occur. Oh, note that the word should is used. Pag sinabing should, it is mandatory. Hindi mo pwedeng hindi gawin yan. Now, itong independent review of information security goes back to yung pinag-usapan natin kanina, which is the red team. The red team is the unit that can be tasked for reviewing the information security implementation. Now, moving forward, now we are that red team or the security auditors or the penetration testing will enable the review for compliance with policies, rules, and standards for information security, because hindi ka pwedeng pumasa sa inyong certification program if you cannot demonstrate compliance with security policies. And then, of course, there should be documented operating procedures, because information processing facilities should be documented and made available to the personnel who need them. Again, the personnel are not just employees, but also the contractors, the guests, and and everybody else who are authorized to use the information assets. Now, here's another one na pinapractice din natin. Actually, lahat. Kaya nga kailangan ng NBI clearance when applying for a job, and sa government, additionally, yung ombudsman clearance. So, screening is required because background verification checks on all candidates, when I say candidates, like applicants for the job who are going to become personnel, should be carried out prior to joining the organization and an ongoing basis, taking into consideration applicable laws, regulations, and ethics, and be proportional to the business requirements in the classification of the information to be accessed and the perceived risks. In practice, yung magandang nagpa-practice ito is the banking industry. If you do something bad and you're in the banking industry and you get fired, hindi ka na pwedeng bumalik in the banking industry because your records will be screened by the BSP, and if you have a criminal background, BSP will not allow you, or the bank pala, to hire you. And if you insist on hiring that bad person, the BSP will remove the license of the bank in this matter. So that's how screening is used in the banking industry. And I'm grateful that they do that because it allows for a more stable banking industry in the Philippines. Okay. In addition to the screening, there should be terms of and conditions for employment, where the contractual agreements should state the personnel's own responsibilities for information security vis-a-vis with the requirements from the organization itself. So, binanggit ko kanina, everybody from the chairman to the president, to the vice president, to the middle managers, down to the janitors, contractor man sila or hindi, they should be made aware in their terms of employment what they should be doing or not doing as per information security policy. And of course, it is required that organizations should have information security awareness, education, and training. Ito pa, isa pa pwede yung pagkakitaan. You can take this PDF that I sent to you, all of you, and create your own information security and awareness training. Pwede yung pagkakitaan to PDF yun. And then, I just open source it. Hala kayo gamitin yan. You can use it as a consulting tool para sa mga ibang tao, for the government, for your internal business, business ng parents ninyo, business ng uncle ninyo or ng tita ninyo or ng kamag-anak ninyo. Use this because it is required that personnel of the organization as well as relevant third party should receive appropriate information security awareness, education, and training, and regular updates like once a year, 4 times a year. Siguro mga once a year ba? Para hindi naman masyado nakakagulo. Kasi pag 4 times, every month, magulo na masyado yun. So, training regarding the information security policy and topic-specific policies and procedures that is relevant for their job function. So, what I'm trying to say here is that you do not compose a one-size-fits-all training program. You compose a training program for, let's say, yung IT people or the lawyers or the auditors or the managers or the HR people. You compose different types of training programs for each type of group of people. And then, of course, after you've given them training and then they still violate the information security policy, there should be a disciplinary process. This disciplinary process should be formalized and communicated to take actions against personnel and other relevant interested parties who may have committed an information security violation. It must be noted na kung wala kayong disciplinary process, hindi nyo pwedeng kasuhan ng isang tao and i-dismiss nyo from service because pwede kayong balikan ng tao na yan, walang disciplinary process, i-demanda yung organization ninyo for violation of labor law. So that's why it's important. This clause is important. Now, another one is responsibilities after termination or change of employment. This means that if a person is transferred from one organization, let's say, nilipat nyo from Bicol to Davao, yung tao, that's a change of employment or transfer of employment, all the responsibilities and duties will remain valid even after change or termination of employment, like mga NDA, return of assets, and this should be defined, enforced, and communicated to them. So, hindi nawawala dapat yung statutory, legal, and contractual obligations. Same, still in the same vein, are confidentiality or non-disclosure agreements. It should reflect on your organization's need for the protection of information, and assets should be identified, documented, and regularly reviewed. And this NDA or confidentiality agreement should be signed by both parties. Kaya kailangan yung pirma, It's because to prove to the court that you are of the right mind and of the sound reasoning, and that you agree to the terms and conditions between the organization and the personnel. Kaya kailangan pirmahan. Wet signature. Pwede naman digital signature, pero wet signature is mas madaling tanggapin in trial courts. Moving forward, remote working. This is a norm because of after the pandemic, wherein security measures should be implemented when personnel are working remotely to protect information that are being accessed, processed, or stored outside the organization's premises. This cannot be helped because a lot of times, mas kakatipid din naman ng organization if the organization allows for remote work. Also, if you're traveling, let's say for a seminar, or you're traveling to abroad because you need to visit another organization, it's also called remote working. And the security controls should not be compromised. And if they are compromised, there should be a mechanism for information security event reporting, wherein the organization should provide a mechanism for personnel to report or observe suspected information security events through appropriate channels in a timely manner. Dun importante, timely manner. Dun nangyari yung COMELEC dati, si Chairman Bautista, because they did not have a mechanism to report events, and then they had a major breach. That's one. Another one, different matter, pero same control, is for personnel. For example, you guys, lahat kayo matatalino, right? And let's say you find let's say you find a vulnerability. Let's say a password na ginagamit ng administrator sa organization nyo. No? The admin password is, well, password. Na-discover nyo yun. You cannot test it. You cannot. You can only report it. Because if you test the vulnerability yourself and you do not have the permission, then you yourself is guilty of violating the Cybercrime Prevention Act for illegal access. So kaya reporting lang. You report whatever you find, but you do not tell people to test it. Unless the only exception is if a person is signed up for a bug bounty. A bug bounty. A bug bounty is basically a contract between a penetration tester and an organization wherein the organization will pay the pen tester if they found some vulnerabilities in their system. But that's another topic by itself. Now, different theme naman ngayon, physical controls. Physical controls means, first one, that your organization should define the physical security perimeter. The perimeter should be defined and used to protect areas that control information and other associated assets. This could be as simple as a gate or as a door and enforced with access control lists. That's it. It's as simple as a door or a gate or a wall. And of course, there should be controls for physical entry. Then that should mean that, only people who are authorized physical access should be allowed through. And again, that control, that list for the access control is dictated by your information security policy. Also, moving forward, you should have a control to secure offices, rooms, and facilities. It should be for rooms, facilities should be designed and implemented. And there should be physical security monitoring because, you need to have the premises should be continuously monitored for unauthorized physical access. One of those things is your RFID for doors, and another one are CCTVs. And you can automate today CCTVs. You can have the AI watch over all of the premises, watch all the cameras, and report on that. But I digress. 7.5 is the requirement for protection against physical and environmental threats. Meaning, bawal ang tumutulong bubong. the, the building should be protected against physical and environmental threats, including baha and earthquake. Earthquake, madali lang kasi there are building codes. The city itself will require the building developers to have a minimum standard to comply with to protect against environmental threats, including earthquake. So, requirement yan. And then, of course, there should be security measures for working in secure areas. And again, it should be designed and implemented. Now, here's another thing na nahihirapan yung maraming tao. The policy on clear desk and clear screen. Every day, lalo na kung maraming tao dumadaan in the office. Pero kahit pag isa ka lang, your desk, each person's desk should have papers and removable storage media, and the clear screen should be defined and appropriately enforced. I emphasize this kasi I used to work with a investigation company years ago, and one of their favorite disguises was to be hired as a janitor, because janitors, yung mga taglilinis ng kubeta, they are treated as invisible person. Hindi pinapansin ng mga janitor tsaka yung mga naglilinis ng banyo. And because of this, that investigation agency, they exploit all these messy desks and computer screens. They exploit it by looking at the desk, especially of those personnel who have access to confidential information, to spy on them or to investigate. They also use this to look for passwords. Because a lot of time, passwords are nakasulat lang on a piece of paper and nakadikit. So, it can be exploited. Another control is equipment siting and protection. So to reduce the risk from physical and environmental threats, it should be designed and implemented. Security of assets of premises should be protected as well. Syempre. And this includes yung mga laptops or your tablets that you use when you're traveling, whether you're in the car or whether you're in a aircraft or whether you're at home. As long as wala ka sa opisina, you are considered off-site and it should be protected. I can't tell you how many times wherein ilang organizations na nakasuhan because they lost their laptop, hindi sinumbong sa sa National Privacy Commission, and hindi encrypted yung laptop, so they had to file and they were, penalized for having such lax security. Okay. Storage media, all throughout their life cycle, it should be of acquisition, use, transportation, and disposal. Note the word disposal, should be handled properly. Kasi it's so very common that if you find a USB right now or a laptop, you can copy from it. I once bought a hard drive from PC Express, and it was supposed to be sold to be as brand new, but it turned out to be secondhand. I did the forensic examination of that hard drive. I found credit cards and pictures of this person. And yeah, because you should be deleting and scrubbing things before you dispose of it. Okay, supporting utilities like electrical or water should be protected as well. Pag nawalan ka ng kuryente, yari, hinto yung operations. Pag nawalan ng tubig, into renewable operations, because a lot of the computers today, like in data centers, are water cooled. So water is important in a facility. Cabling security as well. Anything that can carry power, data, or information services should be protected from interception, interference, or damage. Interception is easy actually. Like if you have a ammeter and you clamp it on an Ethernet cable, you can actually wiretap it without breaking the cable. The only thing exempted from wiretapping that easy are fiber optic cables. And another one issue that comes to mind is it has happened so many times. In DPWH, they would dig on the streets, then napuputulan ng internet yung mga data center. It happens all the time. Or, in the coming war with China, and it's actually happening in Taiwan right now, the communist military of China are cutting cables in the underground on the sea. So to disconnect people from the internet or from communications across the entire country as well. Equipment maintenance is important. It should be enabled to ensure availability, integrity, and confidentiality of information. The biggest stupid example of poor equipment maintenance was back in January of 2003, when the entire Philippines, the radar system of the entire Philippines went offline. It went offline, so no flights were allowed in and out. And that was on January 1, kasagsagan ng travel because of vacations, right? And you know what it was? It was just simply because the automatic voltage regulator, as well as the uninterruptible power supply of the radar system and the communication systems of CAAP was ill-maintained. Sabay-sabay sila. Sira na pala sila, and then the failure cascaded until the entire Philippines went offline. But you can read about that on the news. And then, of course, there's secure disposal or reuse of equipment. Items of equipment containing storage media should be verified to ensure that any sensitive data and licensed software has been removed or securely overwritten prior to disposal of reuse. This is why I'm a fan of buying secondhand stuff from Tipid PC or Carousel. Kasi if I buy USB or hard drives and then I use forensic equipment on it, I find a lot of interesting information in there. So that's why I encourage people to, erase stuff in a forensically acceptable manner before they sell their hard drives or USB. Or if you cannot do that, just get a hammer and a nail, a concrete hammer, and then smash it. Smash it with the hammer and nail. Other controls include user endpoint devices because information stored on, processed by, or accessible via user endpoint devices should be protected. This includes laptops, computers, routers, Wi-Fi access, and so on and so forth. Should also be protected. And privileged access rights. These are the administrator passwords or the root passwords, the allocation of which and use of privileged access rights should be restricted and managed in your organization. Hindi dapat lahat may root access or administrator access. Kahit siya pa yung presidente ng organization. Lalong-lalo na kung siya yung presidente ng organization. That person should not have root access because it is easy for that person to compromise the entire organization. Information access restriction should be restricted in accordance with, again, information security policies. Another thing is access to source code. Read and write access to source code, development tools, and software libraries should be properly managed. Itong access to source code is more important than ever. I believe it was Samsung back in 2024 yata yun, early 2024, wherein their source code started to leak out kasi yung kanilang GitHub nilink nila kay ChatGPT because they tried to write, software. Of course, ChatGPT is a public entity. And of course, ChatGPT will use your private information to train its models to become better. So what happened is Samsung, the source code, the proprietary source code of Samsung leaked out because they used it on a public AI. I'm siguro right now I don't remember kung ChatGPT or if it was somebody else, but it was, you can Google for that news incident. Access to source code should be properly managed. And if you really want to use AI for your source code, then use a private AI like Olama or anything LLM para to run your own personal AI so it doesn't leak out on the internet. Another control which we're talking about is secure authentication. These procedures should be implemented again based on the information access restrictions, based on the access control, which in turn are dictated by the information security policy. Capacity management then. A lot of people neglect this. Basically, what we're requiring here is that the use of resources should be monitored and adjusted in line with current and expected capacity requirements. Meaning, the server or the firewall or intrusion detection system, it should be monitored. If the CPU is very high, more than 80%, it should be upgraded, or the disk is more than 75% storage, it should be upgraded already, and so on and so forth. The capacity of your devices should be monitored and adjusted or upgraded accordingly. Ito importante rin to, protection against malware should be implemented and supported by appropriate user awareness. One of the still the most heavy hitters, the malware, are the ransomware. And it could be as simple as using proper firewall controls as well as the use of TrueNAS. Hindi ko na ilagay dito. But TrueNAS is a file server wherein it uses ZFS on the underlying. So if a Windows user which is accessing a shared file system and they get malware, you could just simply reinstall whatever the operating system on the Windows machine is, and then on the TrueNAS side, on the file system side, you could just restore to a previous snapshot, and para ka nag-time travel. Kung ano yung backup mo, like yesterday, it will come back without the malware. We can talk about that later on. Pero ransomware protection is easy, pero it could have a lot of moving parts. Another control is the management of technical vulnerabilities, wherein technical vulnerabilities, like this is where papasok yung patch management ng NIST SP 800-40 Release 4. Information about technical vulnerabilities should be obtained, and of exposure of your organization to such vulnerabilities should be evaluated so that appropriate measures should be taken. So segue tayo sa SP 800-40. So this American standard for the US government, for American government agencies, define patch management as the process of identifying, prioritizing, acquiring, installing, and verifying patches across information technology, across operational technology, across Internet of Things, across the cloud, and then prescribes a patch strategy or a preventive maintenance strategy with governance, procedure, rollout, and verification steps. So yan yung value ng SP 840-R4. And it maps directly to Control 8.8 and later on 8.32, as well as dependent on 8.16 on threat intelligence, which is 5.7, and then yung readiness for business continuity, which is control 5.30. That is the value of 800-40 and why you are studying it. Going back to ISO 27002, configuration management. Configuration, including security configurations ng hardware, software, services, networks, should be established, documented, implemented, monitored, and reviewed. This could be as simple as configuration, mga conf files on Linux machines, or it could be as simple as yung registry entries, Windows. Then again, on another control, information deletion, information stored in information systems, devices, or other storage media should be deleted when no longer required. Okay, especially if you're dealing with personal information, because personal or private information are toxic. Because of the Data Privacy Act, you should not hold on to personal information as much as possible. Only when you are required to do so and when you have the consent of the data subject, that's the only time you should be dealing with that. Otherwise, delete them. That includes pictures of faces, names, addresses, especially health information. Because if you don't delete them and you're not authorized to handle private information, at the maximum, per person, you're going to go to jail for 2 years in jail, plus fined 2 million pesos. So kulong ka na, nagbayad ka pa ng 2 million pesos. Data masking should be used in accordance with the organization's topic-specific policy on access control. So basically, ito yung mga ... na pag nagtatype ka ng password, that's an example of data masking. So it prevents people from snooping on your password. Similar to that is data leakage prevention. It should be, measures should be applied to systems, networks, and other devices that transmit or store sensitive information, data in transit or data at rest. It should be prevented from leaking. And again, at the very minimum is to protect you from violations of the Data Privacy Act, as well as to protect yung inyong confidential or intellectual property rights or secret sauce ng organization nyo, like yung customer database. Now, of course, organizations should have backups. Copies of information, software, and systems should be maintained and regularly tested. As I mentioned kanina, backups are useless if you do not test them and if they're not useful. And then, of course, depending on how much your organization can afford it, there should be redundancy of information processing facilities. So if you don't have redundancy and you're trying to manage hundreds of millions of pesos worth of assets, pwede kayo kasuhan ng negligence if you fail to do redundancy simply because, you're careless. So, importante yung redundancy. Logging is the process that records activities, exceptions, faults, and other relevant events and should be produced, stored, protected, and analyzed. There is actually the ISO standard what are the minimum logging information that is required to comply with this control. Pero it is important because logs are important in investigations as well as learning from what to do and how to or what to improve next in your systems. Logging is important for monitoring activities because networks, systems, and applications should be monitored for anomalous or bad behavior. And so that appropriate actions should be taken to evaluate potential information security incidents. Now, a good demonstration of this is Snort. We use Snort or Suricata for intrusion detection systems. So intrusion detection systems like Suricata or Snort, those are open source systems. They monitor network traffic for unusual or suspicious activities and then sends these alerts to the administrator. So it's useful to know if something bad is happening. Lalo na if, to prevent yung explosion of ransomware infestation, you need this as one of your tools. And then, of course, the intrusion detection tools, they forward all of these to an SIM or to the Security Information and Event Management System, which in turn collects logs from multiple devices like intrusion detection systems, firewalls, your Windows 11 Event Manager, or the syslog from your Linux machines, then correlates it so that it could give you a big picture. One example of this SIM, and it's very, very popular, and it's very, very useful, is Wazoo. It can be installed using Docker, and in fact, a lot of small businesses here in the Philippines are selling services. So, kung may mga security guard, physical security guard, they sell security guard services, and then they also have CCTV to monitor the physical premises of an organization. Some small businesses here in the Philippines use Wazoo to monitor computers of their clients. And it could be as simple, siguro, like 500 pesos per computer per month as a service to monitor. And then the Wazoo does most of it. And then the human, will just read the output of Wazoo and then sell that report to your customers. So that is what Wazoo is. And it's very good. Now, back to the ISO standard. Clock synchronization is important. So this means that clocks of computers or information processing systems should be synchronized to approved time sources. In fact, for government facilities, as well as for critical infrastructure, like telcos, like yung mga mobile phones, they are all required by law, which is the Philippine Time Standardization Act. I forgot the exact name, but they're required by law to synchronize with the clock of Pag-asa from DOST, or the Department of Science and Technology. Everybody, all government facilities, all critical infrastructures are required to synchronize their clock. Para lahat tayo pare-parehas. And it's extremely important, not just for establishing encrypted connections, but also for investigations. Para pag sinabi mo, 5:11 nagkaroon ng hack sa isang lugar, 5:10 a.m. in the morning, have another one, you can easily synchronize in your mind during investigation what really happened. That's why clock synchronization is extremely important. 8.18, use of privileged utility programs. The use of such programs could be capable of overriding system and application controls, should be restricted and tightly controlled. Ito yung mga tinatawag natin administrator tools, could be also be a hacking tools. So Linux machines have a lot of tools that allow you to do this. Now, installation of software and operational systems, it should be restricted. Like, you should not be able to install Steam games on your corporate laptop. That's one example. Another control is network security. Networks and network devices should be secured, managed, and controlled to protect information systems and applications. security of network services, the mechanisms, the service level agreements, and the requirements should be identified, implemented, and monitored. Importante to. I will show you, in a slide in a while. Pero akin to that is the segregation of networks. Groups of information security services, users, and systems should be segregated depending on their network, depending on their requirements, their job description, and so on and so forth. Dahil if something bad happens in one network, in one part of the network, it should not automatically spread to other users. So you contain them by design. And one way of doing that is to use firewalls. Firewalls are used to separate trusted from untrusted networks. Trusted, in fact, trusted networks, meron pang different levels of trust. So a firewall is also used to control that by preventing network packets from going from one place to another if they are not allowed as per security policy. One of the best open source tools that you could also use and that you should have in your own test laboratories is pfSense. pfSense is an excellent firewall, runs on simple equipment, like yung mga NOC, pwede na yan, or old equipment. And then you can also install Pi-hole to block ads or malware, and then Snort, complement it to do intrusion detection system, and also to encrypt some of your data or all of your data. You can use OpenVPN. All of these tools and more can be installed on pfSense, and they're all free. We'll skip this for now, tong address translation, but it's a great thing and everybody does this kasi wala ng oras. It's 1:30. Now, another thing that is required is web filtering. So external access, external websites should be managed to reduce exposure to malicious content. One of the reasons why we have to do this is that bawal ang anti-child abuse and child abuse materials to be viewed. And therefore, in fact, all of these child abuse websites sa telco pa lang, they are being blocked. Kasi bawal nga eh. And then of course, bawal din to access, torrent sites. So na Yifi, bawal yan. Especially if you're accessing from your corporate network, bawal. All right, moving forward, use of cryptography. The rules for effective use of cryptography, including management, should be defined and implemented. Swerte tayo sa Pilipinas because we don't have strict rules on the use of cryptography, but on other areas, a few decades ago, sa United States, it used to be illegal to export encryption. But now it's okay. They can do that. They've changed it. But in UK and in many parts of Europe, they are requiring iPhone users, including China and Korea and Turkmenistan, bawal ang encryption on your phone. The government mandates that they should be able to access your iPhone or your Android phone at any time they want to, because they have new laws. And it's a bad thing, because no matter what the government tells you, if they have backdoor access to your data, then it also means that other bad people will have access to that data. We can talk about that later on, because that's an entirely new topic to talk about. VPNs, we'll skip this for now, but basically VPNs enable you to secure encrypt communications between private networks going through the internet without being snooped on by the telco or somebody else that is not like Wi-Fi on Starbucks. If you use VPN, they will not be able to sniff on your network traffic. We can talk about encryption later on. Important in cryptography because cryptography is recognized by law in the E-Commerce Act of 2001, on year 2001. I don't know, pinanganak na kayo, pero yes, we've had the law that recognizes electronic documents and public key cryptography since year 2001. Another technological control we should be aware of is secure development lifecycle. Rules for secure development of software and should be established and applied. This is even more relevant today because of the advent of vibe coding. It is predicted that there will be people, organizations from now on will have less reliance on SaaS or software as a service or Microsoft Azure Cloud or Microsoft Office 365 or Google Docs or whatever have you. There will be less dependency or requirements for SaaS because of vibe coding. Everybody will be doing their own programming at home because there are so many tools using AI to develop your own source code. In fact, you don't even have to be a software developer right now. You can just ask. One of the best is Claude. Claude to generate source code for you, develop your own Python program, your own Perl, your own C, C++. Everything can be written by AI today. And it does not take into, vibe coding, unfortunately, does not take into account secure programming standards. Kailangan gumamit kayo ng programming standards like OWASP or the Open Web Applications Security Project. They define what constitutes a secure program. And your vibe coding should take that into consideration. Because this 27002 requires a secure development lifecycle. Subset nun is your application security requirements, because security requirements for servers should be identified, specified, approved when developing or just outsourcing or acquiring new applications. You should also have a secure system architecture and employ engineering principles. So this means that the design pa lang, and then the implementation, and then the operation of these application servers should be fully secure. Same thing with secure coding. And of course, after you've bought or built your own application servers, you should be doing security testing and development and acceptance. Mandatory to sa banking industry. You cannot introduce a new banking application without it going through security testing and development and acceptance. You cannot do that today. And it's not just anybody who can do the testing. It has to be a professional na acceptable kay BSP. Kasi if you claim to do it for testing, tapos hindi naman pala, maganda yung reputation ng tao, bagsak pa rin yung testing process, including outsourced development. So whether you build it in-house or you outsource it, it should be able to comply with the minimum security requirements. Additionally, there should be separate development, test, and production environments. In my course in my career, I have penetrated different banks, online banking system. Like, let's say you online banking system, you change yung amount that you know yung sa online banking system mo, and if you change the amount in the online banking system, you can actually go to the ATM and withdraw that money. You can do that if you are able to hack all the online bank. Right today, after several years, after more than a decade of iterations, medyo mas maganda na yung online banking system ng Pilipinas. It's hard to do that right now. It's practically impossible today. But before, one way of me doing that, I do not go directly to the production environment. I hunt down the test environment ng banko. I hack into that, and then from there, I move laterally to other servers in the bank. That's how we used to do it before. So that's why for this control, there should be a separate development, test, and production environments to prevent such things that I just described. Additionally, change management is important. I cannot tell you how important this is. Kasi nga, pag nagkakabintangan na who was negligent, who was at fault, who was the person who was malicious, it's more often than not, it's the change management process that captures and produces the evidence of who is guilty or at the very least negligent. Because this control requires that changes to information processing facilities and information systems should be subject to change management procedures. I think it's one of change management is also a topic in your SYSSEC 3. Test information should be appropriately selected, protected, and managed. There's a funny story in this test information that day. So one of the ways that I was able to break into a bank was to go at night, and with my pickup truck dati, with my Hilux, I used to steal in trash ng banko. I focused on the paper because banks generate a lot of printouts per day. And the printouts, it's disgusting because sometimes people use it to wipe their tables. It's disgusting. So I have masks, I have gloves, and I segregate it, and then I burn them later on because I don't know the biohazards. But what's important is that they printed username and passwords on their test machines in the trash material, and I was able to get them and break into a bank because I was able to reuse their root account and their passwords back then. So that's important, that test information should be properly selected, protected, and managed. All right. Protection of information systems during audit testing should be planned and agreed between the tester and appropriate management. Magkaka-similar thing to. So we come to the last slide. If you take all of this into consideration, all of the controls I mentioned about, I think I mentioned almost 100 controls. Put them all together. You design layered security, and then you train your people, and then you tell them what's good or what's bad, what's allowed or what's not. Then you have a data center. A lot of times we use the analogy of a castle. That's what you see. Pero in reality, what you see are computers in cages. There you go. And with that said, we're now open for discussion. I think it's 1:40 p.m. I have a few more minutes for question and answer. Professor Magsaysay, you may take the plenary.